We know that most HR people have to deal with leaders that won't hold people accountable, leaders that will come to them and say, hey, take care of this thing for me. Or people they've talked with, they've asked leaders to hold people accountable, and then things don't get done. And so it's one of the biggest fears of any adult, not just a leader, is the fear of confrontation. And also, we have this fairy tale thinking that things are going to work out even if we don't deal with them. And so that leaves this big burden on the organization, on HR, to try to solve problems that people are not dealing with.
Good morning, HR. I'm Mike Coffey, president of Imperative, bulletproof background checks with fast and friendly service. And this is the podcast where I talk to business leaders about bringing people together to create value for shareholders, customers, and the community. A quick housekeeping announcement before we get rolling. I've heard from a number of HR leaders that they set aside time in their weekly team meetings to discuss each week's episode. So first, thank you for sharing that with me. It's really cool that my post-COVID passion project is actually being useful to people in the real world. And then to help you facilitate those conversations, starting with last week's episode, we're publishing a one-page PDF with a short list of discussion starters. The link to download the PDF is going to be in the show notes or at goodmorninghr.com. I hope you find them useful. And so I'm joined today by Pam Boyd and Bernie Beck. Pam is a past guest of the podcast way back on episode number 8, and she's a prolific writer, keynote speaker, and consultant. And through her company, Dramatic Conclusions, she helps employers create drama-free workplaces. And Bernie Beck has decades of business leadership experience and more than 4,000 consulting, executive coaching, and training hours. Pam and Bernie are the authors of The Drama-Free Business, From Inception to Succession. And I'll include the Amazon link in the show notes. Welcome to Good Morning HR, Pam and Bernie.
Hey, it's our pleasure. We love
Thanks
being
for
with
having
you.
us, Mike.
Yeah.
Appreciate it.
So the book is The Drama-Free Business. And we talk a lot about managing conflict, but I don't hear so much about managing drama. So what's your working definition of drama, and how is it different from just plain old conflict?
Okay, great question, Mike. Drama is anything that causes you to roll your eyes when
my
you're thinking
gosh.
about work. Think about that. Drama is anything that causes you to think, why did I do this with my life? Where did these choices come from? Why am I here? When do I get out of this mess? And if you think about that in your own life, when you're discussing with yourself who you are and what you're doing, if you come up with so many things or even one or two things that are draining your energy, that's an indication that you're not working in a drama-free environment. We have conflict. We have things that require us to really work hard for solutions, but it doesn't have to be a drain on your spirit. And that's what we're trying to do, is help eliminate things like dealing with people with huge egos, dealing with know-it-alls, dealing with, people who are not following their goals, not keeping, not staying in line with the company strategy and the company vision, people who are gossiping and backbiting. That's not just about conflict. That's about the leaders sometimes who are kind of doing that with each other as well. So there's all kinds of things that come into that description, but you have to be a soul searcher to see, where is it happening to me?
One of the things, Mike, that we did when we put this book together was capture the years of coaching and consulting that we've been doing and realizing there's a lot of common denominators that are taking place in the business world. And by following some fundamental practices, simple things like making sure people have clear expectations about what their roles are, how their performance is going to be measured, very simple fundamentals that can help eliminate the drama that occurs by not doing that blocking and tackling that every leader and business owner should be doing.
So drama, just, I think one of the things, I think you described it in the book as wasted energy,
Yes.
just from, poor emotional intelligence or just poor self-regulation. And I'm sure for every listener, somebody comes to mind. And if nobody comes to mind, it's probably you. But we've all worked with
I
people
love
who may be really proficient at their job, but they're like, I've always called them office vampires because they're slowly sucking the productivity out of the organization, just from how they carry themselves, how they present every day, how they interact with their peers, their lack of personal accountability or whatever it is. But you mentioned leaders, so how often do you think the root issue is because of either a leader's own personal drama or just their inability to address it?
Well, I'd like to say something about that. I know Bernie's itching to do that too, but talking to HR people, and since we both work in HR a lot as well, we know that most HR people have to deal with leaders that won't hold people accountable, leaders that will come to them and say, hey, take care of this thing for me, or people they've talked with, they've asked leaders to hold people accountable, and then things don't get done. And so it's one of the biggest fears of any adult, not just a leader, is the fear of confrontation. And also, we have this fairy tale thinking that things are going to work out even if we don't deal with them. And so that leaves this big burden on the organization, on HR, to try to solve problems that people are not dealing with. And then they deal with, go ahead. I was just going to say that then sometimes when you deal with them and then you don't have a good contingency plan, you're up against the same problem 30 days later, or 10 days later, or 5 days later.
We specifically use the phrase toxic employees, and we cite that a couple of times in the book. And especially in many of the environments I've worked with, you have those toxic employees who, for whatever reason, maybe it's hard to find a replacement, or they're really good at their job, even though they're antagonizing the rest of the staff, or they've been here a long time, or their spouse had something happen to them, so we really can't let them go, and all the other reasons.
Or they're a rock star performer or
Yes.
producer, especially in sales. I mean, that's where I see it the worst is they're an
Yes,
amazing salesperson. So we'll put up with all kinds of stuff because they
Yes,
bring the money in the door.
that's
that's
right.
right.
And so the courage and candor to deal with those people and have those candid discussions, and then set some guidelines and parameters around what the expectations are for how they're going to behave and how they're going to perform, which is basically the two things we're going to manage, is performance and behavior. And yet the business owners tend to be caught in that proverbial whirlwind. I hear that all the time from our clients, and they don't have the time or commit the energy to have those tough discussions with people to get those things addressed and potentially resolved.
But we always have to find the time after the fact to clean up the mess. And that's what I'm always telling, whether it's in mentoring emerging businesses who are really, I just had lunch with somebody a couple of days ago, and there's somebody she needs to fire on her team. And that person knows probably more than anybody else, but the coaching hasn't worked. The self-awareness isn't there. And this person is undermining the owner and the strategy on a daily basis. She needs to go, but the owner is afraid to lose that skill set. So she's spending so much of her time cleaning up messes behind this person, um, taking personal attacks, challenging her own credibility and integrity from this person. She's putting up with more than I would ever, but I'm not a very patient person. And she's obviously more patient. But I think she's also operating out of fear. And so I guess that's my question is, how much of this do you think is fear-based, especially unreasonable fear? Because how often when you actually address an issue, does it really turn out as bad as you're afraid it's going to?
And I think you can remember, or you might not remember this, but I was that kind of person they hung on to. And then when they finally got me straightened out, it was huge benefit to the company. But we have many stories in the book about this specific problem of hanging on to that person, and how, just like you said, Mike, you get rid of them and you think, oh, it's going to be a terrible disaster. And really, everyone is so grateful when people just kick in and start doing so good because they're so glad that person's not there anymore, and you don't have to deal with what you think you're going to deal with. It's all totally fear based. And
And that's
Bernie,
what makes it irrational, right?
it's irrational.
But it's a phobia, and that means that we don't. It's never as bad as or on occasion it
No.
may be. I mean,
Yeah,
sometimes you have somebody, who just really explodes at you. But if they do that, then that's just more confirmation that you were doing the right thing.
that's right. That's right.
One of the things that we really emphasize in the book and in our practice is the communication and the feedback mechanisms with people. And again, when the leaders get caught in this whirlwind, they don't take the time to have those discussions, to give people evaluations of what's going well, what are their opportunities for improvement, how are we going to help them reach their goals? Do we even know what their goals are? And if we're not slowing down to have those fundamental discussions, then the likelihood of them going someplace we don't want them to go is greatly enhanced. And if we just take the time to we have a tool called personal development plans. It's not a PIP, it's not a performance improvement plan. It's how can we help you get to where you want to go in the organization, in your career, with your life. And on a quarterly basis, sit down with each of your team members and have those discussions, and that's the perfect opportunity to address anything that's going sideways, anything we'd like to have changed in the way they're behaving. Plus, from an HR perspective, that now gives you a fantastic audit trail and documentation. If you do have to part the ways, there's been a fair bit of dialogue along the way to justify that.
I recently spoke at a company, and I had been there 10 years prior. And the guy that had asked me to come was just a young manager when I first got there. And now he was an executive head of a division. And I asked him, what has made the difference for you to get you into this position? And he said, well, I just used the thing you taught me, to use a wish list. And so whenever my new team came on board, I sat down with him and said, give me your wish list. What do you need? What do you want from me? And then I gave them my wish list. And then it kind of, for me, he said, you went to a place where he'd say, I'll give you one and then you give me one. What do you need? And then they went back and forth. And then when I had his new managers in my class, I asked them how much they love the work and why. And they said, we love it because we always have a voice and our boss always wants to know what we want. And we know what he wants. And there's no guesswork involved.
And that takes a leader with a certain amount of self-awareness. And I think that lack of self-awareness or that defensiveness gets in the way. Talk a little bit about what you see when you're working with leaders who need to deal with this stuff, or maybe they're causing some of this drama because of their personality and they just don't recognize it.
Mike, I think you probably would recognize this having looked at the book. The reason that we actually wrote the book, and I've been working on it for 10 years, and I finally had a call in the cavalry, AKA Pam, to help me get it across the line, was I was repeating the same processes and steps week after week, year after year with businesses. And there's certain processes all along the way to get you from understanding the roles of the team members, what their work is supposed to look like, what communication is going to look like, what are their key performance indicators or service level agreements, so we know what's the target we're shooting at. And you literally have to go through every element that's listed in the book, each one of those chapters. And if you go through all of those components, that finally puts you in a place where you can have growth and succession planning and accountability. Yet, if you skip any of those components, be it a job description or feedback loop or whatever, then you're going to have drama come into the work environment somehow.
You talk about some interesting frameworks in the book, and y'all have one called Created, CREATED. And I thought that was really interesting. Kind of walk through that as a model.
Well, this first C is obviously communication, because that's the big deal. And the problem with communication is the illusion that communication has occurred. And people always think they should know what, but we don't know unless you really spell it out to it. Just like when the boss came to me and said, Pam, in the organization, you're perceived as being the B word. And I thought that was all their fault. And I didn't understand what I was doing wrong. I thought they were just mad at me for being direct. And someone had to spell out for me what I was doing in such a clear way so that I could say, okay, this is what I have to do to fix it. So create communication, creating the environment that you want has to start with that kind of candor and that kind of communication that goes through the personality style. for instance, I'm a person that fears rejection. And my bosses would always come to me and they say, hey, Pam, you love people so much and that's great, but you don't hold people accountable because you're scared of rejection. And then I would turn them off as soon as they said, but finally, when a smart boss came into my life, he said to me, Pam, you're good with people and I want you to get more credit for that. Changed everything. And so when strong communication is practiced, it makes a big difference. And
So,
then
and instead of but there made all the difference.
made all the difference.
Wow. That's great.
And so, I mean, and anyway, and good communication comes through good practice and good background information too about that person, who they are, what they want, what do they do well, how can I, praise them or whatever. And if it's a person that's not a talker like me and you try to praise them, but it's a doer, they think you're just,
Blowing smoke,
BSing it,
right?
blowing smoke. And if you've got to know who they are before you start, and then giving people recognition for what they do, know what they do well, because all of us have been in organizations before where we felt like we weren't seen or appreciated. And it causes people to look at work as being a burden and being drama rather than I get to go use my gifts. And then expectations, and like Bernie already referred to, setting clear expectations with contingencies. So we're going to check on this again next week to see how you're doing on this, because usually if you just ask someone to change, they will change for a couple of days and then everything goes back to normal and you wake up with indigestion saying, oh no, it's not working, I got to talk to that person again. But if you set up a contingency, they're in charge of their own bank account. And so then the expectations, and then attracting and staffing the right team. That's such an important thing to do. And you can't do that unless you are the right boss, unless you're branding yourself to be that kind
Yeah,
of
I mean, there's an
organization.
entire chapter we've dedicated just to the attraction piece and
Yeah.
sourcing the right team. And one of the things we're always seeing is this desperation hire because we weren't expecting Mike to leave us next week. How did that happen? I don't have any pipeline. So now I'm going to take that proverbial first person that fogs the mirror and throw them on a team and hope they work. And if you go through this
And
diligent
they've got a
process,
pulse.
They got
yeah,
it.
yeah,
Yeah.
and they will keep that seat somewhat warm. Okay, that'll work. But really, it's so important, especially in the HR world. And I've been a senior professional in human resources since 2013. I understand the pain that HR professionals are going through. And if we can actually conduct the due diligence that's necessary to make a proper hire, the likelihood of success for that person in the organization is 10x. It's just having the discipline to go through all those steps.
So what do you think? What's your unique insight of your the magic sauce for attracting and selecting really good talent? Is there anything that jumps out that's unique, or is it just the standard blocking and tackling that nobody does and they should?
One of the things that has been remarkable is it's amazing what kind of talent we can find from our internal network. So the people that are already working with us and for us and our friends and family and neighbors, sometimes you don't have to go out the organization to find fantastic talent to fill some of the voids. So we get our entire team going out and sourcing people for positions we have openings for. That takes some of that burden and stress off of the HR
Because,
person who's
because
expected
they're
to do
having
it all.
because they're having fun at work and they're enjoying work and they believe in the work. I think our chapter is titled "Brand It and They Will Come." You brand it as being a place where you can be seen and utilized, and that people are trying to help you get what you need. It makes all the difference.
And let's take a quick break. Good Morning HR is brought to you by Imperative, bulletproof background checks with fast and friendly service. So I received a call from a CHRO that I've worked with in the past. It seems that a new hire showed up at a customer work site wearing an ankle monitor. His recently completed background check from one of the big, fast, and inexpensive background check companies came back clear, and they weren't confident what to do next. So we did some quick research and realized, hey, this dude is a registered sex offender with a pretty hairy history. He was convicted for sexually assaulting women who he had drugged. So this is a bad dude. And of course, their first question is, why wasn't this on the background check from this big prominent background check company we use? So they sent me the background check, and right there in the small print at the end of the background check was a note saying, basically, we only report criminal convictions in the last 7 years. And so the report included research in the county where he had the offense, but his conviction was in 2009, and then he was in prison until 2023. So they probably saw the record, but they didn't report it because that was their policy. Now, a lot of background check companies follow this practice because it's a lot of work to track the laws about what is or is not reportable to an employer all over the country. So they simply apply California's very restrictive reporting laws to every report, even when they aren't subject to California's laws. So when they were conducting this research, they saw that sexual assault conviction, but they didn't report it per their policy. At Imperative, we don't cut corners like that. We report everything we can legally report in the jurisdiction where our client is located. Yeah, that means a lot more effort on our part, but it means that our clients can make well-informed hiring decisions based on the info we provide. You can learn more about how Imperative serves our clients at imperativeinfo.com. If you're an HRCI or SHRM certified professional, this episode of Good Morning HR has been pre-approved for 1/2 hour of recertification credit. To obtain the recertification information, visit goodmorninghr.com and click on Recert Credits. Then select episode 226 and enter the keyword CREATED. That's CREATED. Also, if your organization is looking for a speaker for an education or leadership event, reach out to me at education@imperativeinfo.com. And now back to my conversation with Pam Boyd and Bernie Beck. I think that employee brand, that idea that your own team is out there promoting you,
Yes,
has so much more credibility than the way you write your job postings on Indeed or what your website says, because everybody knows, yeah, somebody wrote that for them, or they fed that to into AI, and it put a whole bunch of emojis and M dashes in it. But that's different than when somebody who really works there says, hey, you've got the skill set. We're looking for somebody like this, or,
like
or
you.
I don't even know if we've got anything, but you ought to go talk to HR, or you ought to go look at our website, see what's available, because this is a cool place to work.
Yeah. And the likelihood that it's a credible referral, they're not going to refer somebody who they think is, oh, this person's going to be the dregs. No, they're going to be a superstar. And that's why I'm willing to take that opportunity to refer them.
But Bernie and I have seen this so many times where we're trying to fill a gap with a company, and we'll tell, hey, have you thought about Elizabeth? She's already on your team, and she's got this desire, and she's got these skills. Oh, we didn't know she wanted this, or we didn't know. And so many gaps can be filled if people just know who they're dealing with, and that's buried things that they haven't asked for yet from a person, and they're dying to give it to them. I mean, Bernie, haven't you seen that so much this year, even with.
Yes, yeah, and I've got a lot of my businesses are down in Australia and New Zealand, and they're going through some economic struggles there, and some real challenges with labor and other things, and that kind of creative resourcing for your staff is necessary. One of the other things that comes to mind, you mentioned the secret sauce, Mike, is that a fantastic tool resides in LinkedIn. And I say that in that oftentimes when I'm trying to fill a role specifically for one of my companies or help them, then I will reach out to people who are already in that position and let them know, hey, I'm trying to fill my sales manager position or whatever it is for this company. Do you have anybody, in your network who might be interested? And it's amazing how many times I'll respond back and say, well, tell me more about it.
Yeah.
Yeah, right.
Yes.
And I mean, now that might have been part of the MO altogether, but still,
It
again,
works, yeah.
casts the net.
Well, and we've talked a lot on this in the last 6 months here on the podcast about AI and its impact on the workplace. Certainly, AI is going to make a lot of jobs, especially the tedious part, the repetitive parts, of a lot of jobs go away as far as the amount of time that individuals have to spend doing that. And for a lot of companies, that's going to mean less headcount. But you've got these people who are already on your team, they're already invested and they care about the organization. And often, if you look beyond just what their job title is and their job duties, you can see competencies and skills and behaviors that'll make them successful in other parts of the organization. And you'll take that time to do that inventory, which in a large organization, I get it is hard because this manager's in a silo over here, this manager's in a silo, and maybe we don't have the best technology yet to figure out behaviors, competencies, and those kinds of things that are cross roles. But if we can do that, that cuts our cost per hire. Somebody's acclimation to the organization is instant. You don't have that 6 months of a honeymoon and then almost divorced and maybe they're happy, all those things because they're already bought into the organization, and you're not losing that investment. So I think all of that makes so much sense.
And I was going to say that the D in creative stands for development. And if people know that you have an organization where you're actively trying to develop people and actively giving them the opportunity to tell you what kind of things make them excited, then that helps it. It helps attract people, but it also helps keep people and it helps the whole environment, the whole engagement, which is the E in creative. Yeah.
And so the T is team building. So talk about
Yeah.
team building a little bit more. Yeah.
Yeah, I love Daniel Cole's book, The Culture Code, and we did include some things about that in there. But in team building, what you're talking about is a culture that breeds a lack of ego, a culture that breeds honesty, and a culture that breeds forgiveness for mistakes, a culture that breeds those kind of things. And I love Daniel Cole's examples all through the book of people who just how you have someone in your organization or in any team that sets that standard for honesty and authentic behaviors, and what a culture of team building you have because of that. And when you have an individual or a boss that doesn't really spend time buying into that, then the team doesn't grow, the culture doesn't grow.
We've touched on communication a couple of times. I referenced the personal development plan, which is a great opportunity to have consistent communication and one-on-ones basically with your team. The components of feedback and listening are so critical. And oftentimes what I see is the managers or owners of the organization don't take time to solicit feedback and or actually actively listen to their people. The people are actually doing it day in, day out in the workforce, who are a source and a wealth of information if we'd slow down enough to ask and build an environment of trust where they actually know that they can go ahead and share their feedback without fear of reprisal or anything else. And it's so critical. That's when we talk about things like employee surveys, and businesses are often reluctant to get down that road. And is it anonymous? How do we do that? And the key with employee surveys is that's a wealth of information, as long as the managers follow up on those surveys and let everybody know, okay, we heard you, thank you, here's what we're going to do based on that, and here's what we aren't going to do and the reasons why. And if we can get to that kind of a um, systemic process where people actually know they're being listened to, the next time you go around, you're going to get more and more feedback from those surveys, and the candor and the open conversation just tends to start flowing.
And I was just going to add to that, one of the cancers of the lack of engagement, the lack of a good culture is boring meetings that are, tedious and they're not really bringing about the solutions. And when you leave, you're not saying, wow, that was really worth my time. And we talk a lot, whole chapter on meetings and how to stop that nonsense, because we just want to shoot at ourselves when we think about meetings, but also bringing people in to lead, to share the leadership in meetings, bringing passion into the meetings. I've often told people the reason meetings turn into gripe sessions is because the person who took over the meeting had more passion than you had. And so you come to the meeting with passion, and people follow visionaries and they listen to visionaries, and you talk about what's on their mind instead of what's on your mind first. If you know people are critical, you start with the things that are hard to talk about first and get people participating and share the leadership. And so there's practical things like that in the book that give people ideas and stories about how to turn around the opposite environment.
And you touched on it a little bit earlier, but when we engage in coaching, a lot of managers are not very good at coaching. They're good at telling,
Telling.
and they're good at maybe even outlining vague, high level expectations and expecting the employees to read in between the lines. But in really doing coaching, even at and I think people think this idea of coaching as, okay, this is going to be a 1 hour therapy session where the manager has to fix this employee. But we do micro coaching all the time in a healthy organization, right? We're
Yes, yes,
constantly giving
yes.
feedback, we're soliciting it, we're talking about specific things. Hey, this went well, how do we improve this, those kinds of things. And y'all talked about in the book Janet Kirch's I liked it, beers or
Beers,
peers.
beers and peers. Yes.
And I'm like, okay, beers and peers, those are my two favorite things. And so but she talks about behavior or performance. So it's a B or a P. And so I was a little disappointed there. I always thought it was just like, let's take the team out for a drink and just, have a good time. So talk about beers or peers. And I think that's a really good little basic model for a leader who's just going to do some on the spot coaching.
I'm going to jump in here because I actually had a beers discussion with a client in Fort Worth this morning. So the idea is, as I mentioned earlier, two things we really manage are behavior or performance. So the way the acronym works is the first letter is either a behavior that needs to be addressed, an opportunity to improve a behavior. Then we share the effects it has on the organization, on the other team members, on our customers, on any stakeholders. What's the impact of that behavior? And then the third E is, what are our expectations? What are our standards as a business? How do those align with our values? What are the clear expectations that we would want to see in this behavior? Then we give that team member an opportunity to respond. Okay, we've talked about this. You're always showing up late. We've talked about this 6 times. The effect it has on our customers, phones not getting answered, people having to pick up your work. The expectation is you're here on time, which means at your workstation, 8 a.m., ready to go. Give me your response. How do you feel about all that? And we give them the chance, now that we've laid this out, to respond and reply with any feedback they may have. And then we go to the S. So behavior, effects, expectations, response, and then what's our solution? Going forward, Pam, what are you going to do differently to make sure this doesn't go on again? And let's have an agreement. Now, from an HR perspective, who is it on? The responsibility is on the employee who has said, yes, going forward, I'm committing to doing X, Y, and Z to fix this issue. And then Pam's favorite thing from there is the contingency. Pam, you want to
So
talk about your
yeah,
contingency? She's
so let's
passionate
meet
about
next
the
week.
contingency.
We're not going to talk 90 days from now. We're not going to talk 30 days from now. You keep a record of how how you were here on time, and what you did to make sure you were here on time for next week, and we'll talk about it Friday, and we'll see how it's working. And then maybe you have that spreadsheet out and you show me what's working, and whatever. And then I'll say to the person, so if you're not being more consistent, what do you think our next step would be? And that person, when you say, well, you're going to write me up or something, well, we already did that. And so, were you going to fire me? Well, no, you'd fire yourself if that's what happened. And so you take all that anxiety off the chest of the boss and say, look, I don't want to go there, and I don't think you want to go there. So let's just make sure we keep close tabs on this. You give me a report. You give accountability to me or to the boss or whatever that's your direct supervisor, and let's see how it's working.
And I think a lot of us have been in those situations where we talk about expectations and what do we need to do? What's the behavior we need to change? and you give them, I want to hear your feedback here. Tell me what you're thinking. And if you're not careful, you fall in the trap of letting that be a negotiation, right? And I think that's where, and you start down that cycle where the employee just continues to come back to, well, I want to come in at 8:30. It'd be a lot more convenient for me. Well, our clients are calling at 8 o'clock. Well, but it would be so, and they feel like it's a negotiation, and there's a difference between negotiating something and saying, here's what the expectation is. This is black and white.
In fact, that's the example I use in that book of a real situation that I dealt with an employee. And this whole thing, well, other people don't have to be here at the time, and all the excuses. And then using Adrian Ulch's model for holding people accountable. This has been a wonderful solution for me a lot of times to those all the arguments, stopping the arguments, is when you say this: let's not argue about the past. Let's just agree on behavior for the future. Let's not argue about what someone else is doing. Let's just agree on your behavior for the future. And can we do that? And so just stopping. And then the other thing was perception is reality. If people are perceiving, if the organization perceives you're not meeting expectation, that's the reality. It doesn't matter what you perceive. It's how do you change that perception?
Mike, I appreciate you bringing up the beers and peers. And the last thing I want to say about that is that this morning, when I was having that discussion with this leadership team at this business, 6 individuals, the owner was commenting on how they've been able to effectively use this technique over the past year and how it's made it so easy for them to have these sometimes perceived as difficult conversations. And the fact that it's like such a simple process to use, all of our leaders are using it now. They had a couple of new team members in the meeting this morning. So it's like, yes, we're going to get you up to speed on this because it's going to make managing your team and getting improved performance so much easier.
And then after you do it, like Pam said earlier, you've got to follow up. You've got to make that coaching stick. And I think a lot of times we do that one-time coaching, and then we don't. Why didn't they get it? 6 months later, we get mad at them again about the same thing. We talked about this 6 months ago, and you were doing fine, and now look at all this time. These times you've been late, or you haven't met your goals, or whatever it was. Well, but if we didn't follow up and we didn't show them that it was really important, and maybe there's a scorecard, maybe it's we're tracking their contributions to the organization's success somehow, so they know how what they're doing matters and makes a difference. And then we're having those ongoing, hey, I've noticed you've really done this. I really appreciate the change in your behavior. That's really great, and reinforce it rather than just carry a stick all the time. Um, and a lot of this, it seems like, is just trying to figure out ways to operationalize emotional intelligence. So as we wrap up, talk about, you know, your, we've talked about some of these frameworks, and I think those are largely it, but talk about how you, when you're working with clients, operationalize emotional intelligence.
I would start out with, and I hate to go back to the PDP again, but I will, because the typical scenario you see is sometimes the seagull management, where somebody will fly in, drop that proverbial "do this right," and then poop on us and leave and show up again in 6 months. The fact that there's not consistent communication, and so when I think about the PDP, what it does is it really forces that engagement, that discussion, and the clear expectations to be reinforced. And again, the excuse consistently becomes, I don't have time to do that with my people. And the response is, you do not have time to do this. If you want to address progress and improve performance, you have got to make time for these discussions and these conversations and eventually build that trust and candor.
I wanted to add to that Bernie's motto, and I hear him share this with clients a lot, is prepare, care, and dare. And how we get people to understand that from the beginning is that if you don't know what your people want, you are not prepared. If you don't know what they're saying behind your back about you, you are not prepared. If you don't know how to get them more engaged, you're not prepared. And to care enough about each of those person's individual development plan that you are willing to invest the time now rather than to try to fix it later. And then to dare to say the difficult things. And if you're uncomfortable saying it, that's a human problem. But the way we get over it is to have systems that we use that make it easier, like the beers and peers.
Perfect. Well, hey, I think that's all the time we have. I really do appreciate you joining me today, Pam and Bernie.
Oh, it's been
Mike,
And
great.
congratulations on the book.
thank you.
Those are hard things to do, which is why I've never done one. So I'd just rather talk to people on a podcast every week. But
And
thank you all
it's
so much
coming
for
out
joining me.
as an audio by the
Oh,
end of the
nice. That's
year.
perfect. Yeah,
So we know people don't have time to read. But
that's the way to go.
hey,
Yeah.
thank you. And we know that we appreciate you, Mike, because of all your experience in HR before you started this podcast and just how much you understand what everybody's going through. Thank you.
Yeah. Well, thank y'all. It's a passion project.
Awesome.
And
Mhm.
thank y'all for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, please write us a review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you're listening. And then share this episode on your favorite social media platform. It really does help other people find us. And we'd love to hear your thoughts at goodmorninghr.com. And also, don't forget, if you're going to have a team discussion about this episode, remember to grab the discussion starters from our website. The link is in the show notes, or it's at goodmorninghr.com. Good Morning HR is produced by Marianne Hernandez and Paco Corral on Imperative's marketing team. The Good Morning HR theme music was created by Steve Pegler at HR Strategies of Texas. And I'm Mike Coffey. As always, don't hesitate to reach out if I can be of service to you personally or professionally. I'll see you next week, and until then, be well, do good, and keep your chin up.